I think that leads us nicely into our second question, which needs some definition too. We'll get to that in a minute, but the question is, are people basically good? So, Rob, I know you had a definition for good that'll clarify.
Yeah. So again, and this time, well, in Webster, it said good, a comparative state relative to another quality or outcome, desirable in nature, not bad or poor, qualities that are desirable in a particular thing. So there's this aspect of desirability in the word good, and it's always defined relative to a standard or a benchmark.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that, and I also think there was a court case, and there was a judge ruling on it was actually an obscenity case, and part of the judge's ruling was like, you know it when you see it. You maybe can't define it, but you know it when you see it. And I would say we all know goodness when we see it, and we all know badness when we see it, even if the definition might be tough to get to. So, with that in mind, let me just jump in, and I think of this through three lenses too. So I think there's a yes and a no for each of these on whether people are good or not. So, on the good side of the equation, I think most of the people I talk to have a very clear sense of what I call moral duties, things that standards, ethical standards that they sign up for that maybe they feel like they've created on their own or they've adopted on their own. They're picking, I think honesty is good and I think loyalty is good. And, there are things that I just believe that I'm going to live my life um, to these standards no matter what. I think that's good. I think the bad side of that coin is we all know that we don't live up to our own standards. We fall short if we're honest in many ways, even to the standards we've set. We might not lower the standards, but we don't hit the grade a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's can we be truthful, objective judges of our own behavior or character? Um, and it's weird because I do think there's some awareness that we're not living up to even our own standards, in private perhaps. Um, but at the same time, we also judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. And
Mm,
so we grade ourselves on a curve. Let's put it that way. So
exactly right. And that's sort of my second good bad is, even though we might not admit to it, I think we do have standards for others, at least for other people that are in our sort of orbit, right? Our family, our partner, our colleagues, our friends. We do have certain expectations that if they don't meet those, we're not going to be happy. It's not you do you. It's we want sort of this ethical standard. I think that's actually a good thing. But I think to your point, it's very easy to say, well, yeah, I messed up. I'm not perfect, but at least I'm not as bad as that guy. Or, no one really sits down and says, wow, I'm a terrible person. That's not common. I mean, people do get there, but most of the people are pointing to the next guy down the row and saying, well, they're worse. And so I'm okay.
yeah, yeah. And I think we're back kind of to the point or the position of needing kind of a benchmark for that. And what you and I were talking about in the investment world is for you to know if any particular investment that you hold is doing well, you need to compare it to a appropriate benchmark.
Yeah.
So there's risk and return factored in, so you know whether you're above, at, or below that benchmark. It's the only way you can answer that. And so in Christianity, obviously, we're given that benchmark in the form of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Right on. Right on. And I think leads nicely into the third point, which is on the good side too. A lot of people want to, we mentioned it earlier, live their best life. They want to improve, not just from a financial or material standpoint. They want to get better as people and show up better to the people and relationships around them. I think that's a really good thing. But um, I think you made the point about the Olympics. We can't be the people who are in the arena playing the game, trying to get better, and at the same time be the judge on the sideline saying, "Yeah, you got a perfect 10, you can stop." We need someone else to be holding that standard. We just can't do both of those.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, it leads us to knowing we need that objective benchmark for goodness to know where we are as a Christian. Again, I'm going to go to the Word of God and look for what His Word says about, you call it the nature of man, the heart of man, and there's quite a bit. And starting in Genesis 6:5, the wickedness of man was great, and every thought was evil. Genesis 8:21, man's heart is evil from youth. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful and sick. Mark, 7:21 through 23, evil comes from within, including theft, murder, and pride. Romans 3:23, 24, all have sinned and fall short of God's glory. So it's pretty clear. Man's, if you want to call it, default setting as evil and wickedness, according to God.
And you mentioned one of those references. You mentioned pride, and that's not a behavior. It's more of an attitude. So are you saying that, from a Christian perspective, even a wrong attitude can be the wrong thing to do or to think or be?
Um, Explain that question to me again. So, as a Christian, um, as a saved person, sin remains in my life, but it no longer reigns in my life. So I'm still going to be struggling with things as a professing Christian, but it starts with my awareness as to not just the fact that I sin, I'm a sinner, but the seriousness of those. And I think, we were talking earlier, you can look at the Ten Commandments as the law that was given, and most of us could say, I'm not a murderer. But Christ in the Sermon on the Mount took that up, a notch or 10 by saying, okay, I understand you're not an actual murderer, but if you've hated another in your heart, that's the same thing. Or yes, you may not have committed adultery physically, but if you've lusted after another, that's the same thing. And so when you get into that thought world, that's where it gets extremely convicting for everybody.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going, Rob. A lot of people might say, well, I'm a good person. I don't do all these things. But when we talk about standards, it sounds like, at least from a Christian perspective, the standard isn't what are you doing and not doing. It's really also what are you thinking and what are you believing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as I've thought about my uh, the maturation of my faith or the growth in my relationship with Christ, I think I started off as a newly saved person thinking that I was pretty good, So if I was thinking of this graph, I'd be kind of somewhere up here. I'm pretty good. But as I matured in my faith and understood, the benchmark that is Jesus Christ, my perception of my goodness kind of trended downward over time. My perception of God's goodness and Jesus Christ, who was man and lived on this earth, went up. And then in that gap, that ever broadening gap between my actual goodness and his, is where I think love grows.
Mm,
Because it always baffled me when people would say, I love Jesus. It'd be like you saying, I love George Washington. Oh, how can you don't know George Washington? How can you
right.
love him? But it's in the realization of the grace, the depth of his grace and his sacrifice for us, and that even though we are sinful and deserve death, that he was perfect. He was the perfect lamb. He was sacrificed, and he took all of our debts on himself and paid them, so that
Mhm.
through him, as a believer, we are justified in the eyes of God and unblemished.
Yeah, I love that, because it really shows the gap, and we really can't close the gap the way we think we can. It jogs another thought, because I was thinking about this, again, the question, and there's also the question of motive, because I think for a lot of us, we're in contexts where we really have an incentive to to act in an ethical way, right? If we're in the workplace, it goes better for us most of the time if we're honest and if we're friendly and if we are polite. I think the really tough thing is do we follow our own standards, say honesty, when there's a disincentive, when telling the truth might get you in trouble or might get you in hot water politically or with, a higher up? That's where, are we really going to hold to our standards, or are we just really doing what is most expedient to sort of maybe get ahead or go with the flow?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good test. Will you hold to your principles when it could cost you? And then I would also say, will you stick to your principles when it's anonymous and you're by yourself? So
Yes.
will you, in with nobody knowing, will you stick to your principles?
Yeah, that's another great clarifying question. Well, Rob, I'm impressed. I think we tackled two big questions, and we didn't take 2 hours to do it. I had a lot of fun, and I know we're going to be talking more. So, man, thanks for chatting tonight.
Glad to do it. Looking forward to the next conversation, Nathan.
Great. Thanks.
Sure. Take care.